Did you know that the risk of a police officer killing a person with serious mental illness is 6 times likely to cause death than a civilian without mental illness? And that number goes up significantly when the person with mental illness is a person of color. We're going to be discussing that and more in today's broadcast. Stay tuned right after this.
That Corbin and Corbett legal team fighting for the rights of the people. That father-daughter team investing in the youth when the system ain't treating them equal. Providing truth for our people, we able to reach them. So anytime you get accused for a crime and Lord knows you ain't do it, we here to get you through it. Exemplifying prudence and glorifying God, making sure you're compensated for other people's doings. Our vision is to be one of the best. We're small enough to focus on your matter throughout the neighborhoods of Dallas. Working constantly and making sure your rights are protected. A firm team of lawyers, aggressive, effective. A team that has your back in the courtroom. Two well-spoken black lawyers in the courtroom. Investing time and resources when it's evident that you were treated wrong. Now you walking out of Dallas courtroom with a settlement. Corbin and Corbett, the father-daughter legal tag team that has your back in the courtroom. Our purpose is simple. To obtain a favorable outcome for each client and glorify Christ in all we do. Our vision is to be one of the best and most...
Hello, legal rebels. This is attorney Chloe Corbett, also known as the Duchess of Justice, and with me I have
Attorney Augustus Corbett, aka the Minister of Justice.
We are your defiant lawyers. We provide legal analysis of trending politics, policies, personalities, and pop culture to empower you, yes, you watching right now, to defy this unjust legal system. Before we get into today's broadcast, why don't you go ahead and leave us a like, below, but hit the like button below. Excuse me, y'all. I don't know what is wrong with my words today, but hit the like button. Go ahead and make a comment, introduce yourself. We want to interact with you during this live show, and share this video with your family and friends so that they too can become a part of today's broadcast. With that, Dad, how are you doing today?
I am doing fabulous, Chloe, and I hope you are. You're certainly looking fabulous.
Thank you. I'm feeling well, feeling very well. I have a lot of energy because I worked out this morning, so my energy levels are high, and I'm so excited to be up here to discuss this topic with you today.
Yeah, it's a very important topic and very sad topic as well. It's a crisis, actually.
It
and
is.
It's one that we need to discuss. We see it every day in our practice. We see it every day across the nation. And we hope to bring some attention to it. We hope to empower people back in their local communities to, help bring some again, solution to this.
Yeah. And what we're talking about, you all, like I said at the top of the hour, is this deadly intersectionality of police officers, police shootings, those with mental illness. And then when you throw race on top of that, it's just this ugly mixture that oftentimes leads to death. And like what I said at the top, according to the Treatment Advocacy Center, the risk of cops killing individuals with untreated serious mental illness is 16 times higher than other civilians. And that number goes even higher when the person with mental illness is also a person of color. So it is something, unfortunately, that we see every day in our practice as well, since we are civil rights attorneys in this space where we hold police officers and governmental agencies accountable. And we really wanted to bring this crisis to the forefront for our listeners and viewers so that they too can become a part of being a part of the solution and trying to figure out ways to stop this deadly intersection. And I think we have a video that we're going to play at this time as well, right?
Yes, we do. But before we start, I want to say also that The question I think that we all are asking relative to this subject is to bring it even closer to home is whether or not African Americans should call the police when they have a family member who's experiencing a mental health episode. That's the question. Should you even call the police?
Mm.
Yeah, I mean that to me brings the issue home. Should we call the police when a family member is having a mental health breakdown? And by we, I mean, should African Americans call the police when our family members are having a mental health breakdown?
That's the $1 million question. And you know that it's such a shame that we even have to ask ourselves that question, where we even have to contemplate, calling the police, those who claim to serve and protect us, whether or not that is safe to call when a family member is having a mental health issue. So that just tells you the state of the police in this country and the lack of communication and reciprocity and relationship between the black community and police officers, that we even have to ask that. Our white counterparts, they typically don't have to ask that. They know if they call the police, it'll be less likely for their family member to end up injured or dead. And that family member would get the help that they need when they're having a mental health crisis. So it's such a shame, and it really shows the state of affairs in this country, where we even have to consider that $1 million question as well.
Yeah, some of our white counterparts will point out that most of the people who are killed, who are experiencing mental illness, who are killed by police officers are white, which is true. And that's because most of the people in this country are white.
Yep.
But most of the people killed by cops every year, and we're going to see this, I don't want to get ahead of us, are disproportionately black. Disproportionately. All right. So that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, it
So
is.
you want to show the video?
Let's go.
Okay. First of all, can you hear this?
We don't hear it, but we do see the picture. Still not able to hear it.
Still can't hear it. Okay.
While we wait for the audio, what we're showing you all is um, video of a young man who was dealing with mental illness, who was in the middle of a mental health crisis. Um, the young man's family members called 911 to try to get help, and you all will see what that interaction was.
Do you hear that?
I hear it, but it's a little low.
Do you hear any of that? I'm going to go back because I think there's a way that I can help you hear it here. Let me give it a shot. Let me see.
And we want to welcome everyone who is joining us on today's broadcast. Go ahead and give us a shout out, say hey, so we know you're here. I see Alicia's here. What's up, girl? Good afternoon. If you have any questions or any comments on this topic, please go ahead and put it in the chat. We'd like to have a conversation.
All right, let's try it again.
Okay.
Is that better?
It's a little low for me, but it may be good for the audience.
This is a call from the grandmother. That was the mother. I think that's enough, Chloe. Let
Yeah.
me sort of narrate a little bit what we just saw, what we just witnessed, and what we just heard. This young man, his name is Miles Hall. In fact, let us please honor his memory and his life with a moment of silence, please. Thank you all so much. Our condolences go out to the family of this young man, and we pray he's resting in peace. Now, this young man had reportedly a mental health episode, okay? And as a result of that, his grandmother and his mother called 911. And the absolute worst imaginable thing happened. They called 911 trying to get help for their grandchild and their child. The police shows up and shoots him dead.
Mm.
As a parent, I couldn't imagine, quite frankly. You're calling the authorities to get help with your son. He hasn't done anything to deserve death. He's having a mental health episode. And he ends up dead. Can you imagine the guilt that this mother feels and the grandmother? Because again, they never imagined. If they had, they wouldn't have called. They never imagined that that phone call would result in the death of their loved one. And that is the issue. Now, I want to also point out that for many people, what they're saying is he was armed. He had that metal pipe. And in their minds, that's the end of the analysis. That's the end of it. He deserved to have been shot to death. In fact, the district attorney in that jurisdiction did not bring any charges against any of the officers. Okay? And I'll say in fairness to the officers, it is complicated knowing how to respond to people with mental illness. But that doesn't absolve police departments because it's a known fact that many people that police officers encounter have mental illness. Therefore, police departments should train officers or have other interventions that we'll talk about so that these encounters don't have to end up being life-threatening, don't have to end up with anyone being dead. So, against that backdrop, We wanted to show that video because, again, the question is, should African Americans even call 911 when they have a loved one who's in emotional or mental or psychological distress like that?
Yeah. And against that backdrop, that question, we're going to be talking about the causes, the consequences, and the cures, potential cures that African Americans can do if they have a loved one who's experiencing a mental health episode and need to get 911 or a mental health crisis worker involved. What I would like to do from the jump is just define what mental illness is. What is mental illness? Um, a lot of people have different definitions, but according to psychiatry.org, mental illnesses are simple health conditions. So, like a physical condition, a physical illness that a person might have. It's a health condition that involves changes in emotions, thinking, or behavior, or it could be a combination of all three. So, first and foremost, it's a health condition. It's not simply just being crazy, just being out there. It is a health condition, like I said before, similar to a person who has to manage diabetes, a heart condition, mend a broken leg, etc. So that's the first and foremost thing that I want people to know.
Well, thank you for bringing that.
And
Thank you for bringing that out because
yes,
you know there is a certain stigma, you know, with mental illness, and the thing you said, people just say, well, he's crazy, or she's crazy, and that's not what this is. Mental illness is at all.
no, it's not. And the health condition involves changes in the brain. So the brain actually changes. And that can be a change in the emotional state of the person, which obviously the brain controls. It can be a change in the thinking of the person, which again, the brain is the nucleus. And it can also be a change in the behavior of the person, which again goes back to the brain. And it can also be a combination of these things. So the person's emotional state can change, their thinking can change. A lot of people have heard of schizophrenia. That's where a person will begin to have delusions that are not based in reality. So their thinking is changed, their emotional states are changed. There is depression, there is dissociative identity disorder, there is anxiety disorders, and so much more. And typically, so also mental illnesses can be associated with distress or problems functioning in society or in work activities or family activities. So we wanted to bring out that a mental illness is just a physical condition that involves changes in the brain and it can affect the person's emotions, thinking, and behavior. And in fact, according to psychiatry.org, nearly 1 in 5 US adults experience some form of mental illness, and that number goes down to 1 in 24 have a serious mental illness, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, that really wreaks havoc on their lives. So that's what we're talking about. People who are experiencing these health conditions, should Black people call 911 when their family member is experiencing those things? Um, so, what are your take on just mental illness as it's seen in society at large, Dad?
Well, like I said, I think there's a stigma associated with it. Um, Again, people call folks with mental illness crazy, retarded, all these bad terms.
Yeah.
And I like the way, and I thank you for taking the time to explain that because we don't have that same stigma with someone who has some other type of illness, cancer, diabetes, heart attack, um, you know, on and on. There's not that stigma. But when it comes to mental illness, there is that stigma. There is, you know, people, society treating folks with mental illness in a very unfair way oftentimes. and we're going to get into that as well. And I have really seen the consequences of mental illness on people after practicing law for about 15 years now. And that's why when we get folks like criminal defendants, when we are representing people who are in jail or going through the criminal justice system who have mental illness, they get the very highest priority with us. We give all our clients priority, but that person gets the highest priority. I mean, the top priority, because we know how vulnerable they are in society. Can you imagine how vulnerable they are in jail?
Yeah, I know. Because and it goes back to the larger issue of law enforcement and governmental agencies not doing enough to solve this mental health crisis and to really come up with solutions to help people who are dealing with mental health issues to integrate into society, etc. And I want to say this again: mental illness is nothing to be ashamed of, you all. It is a medical condition like having heart disease or having diabetes. And let's keep it real, Dad, because we keep it real here. It is unfortunately seen, it is stigmatized and seen bad in a large set of the Black community. And a lot of Black people do not go to, go to therapists or go to licensed psychologists or psychiatrists to get treatment for maybe undiagnosed mental illness or know how to manage it, or even to know whether or not they have it so it can be managed. And we need to stop that stigma in the Black community because it's just hurting us. It's just hurting us. It's just, and it's not helping to solve the larger issue, because a large majority of people with mental illness, it's treatable. They're able to either be put on medication or not, go to therapists, be able to self manage it. So it should not be stigmatized, especially in the Black community.
Yeah, I agree. Very good. Why do you think it is so stigmatized in the Black community?
I think it's a lack of information. And um, I feel like as a whole, a lot of Black people are based out of the church. And I feel like because the church is so dominant in our community, which I'm a Christ follower, I'm a person of faith. I believe in prayer first and foremost. So don't get it twisted. I'm going to pray. But I also believe that we can use that in conjunction with speaking to a counselor or a therapist if needed. God has given us the ability to study the brain, to study these various illnesses. And I believe that if you go to a therapist who, you know, knows is faith based and knows how to treat these illnesses, you should go see a therapist. So I think it's just stigmatized because of a lack of information, one, and maybe because we're so religious that it may be seen as, going against the Bible, or oh, you're not really a believer because you're not praying, you're going to see a therapist. So I think it's all wrapped up in that.
Well, yeah. So I think there are some times, though, when mental illness, the source of it is a spiritual condition of some sort. And so I do think that there should be a working in conjunction oftentimes between the professionals and the minister. In fact, I have a first cousin who's a psychiatrist. She and I went to college together, and she, on one occasion, asked me, how can you sort of tell the difference if it's a spiritual condition or if it's a true psychological, mental um, situation? And I took her to the Word of God, took her to the Bible, and gave her some pointers. Um, so I think it is true that the field of psychiatry and psychology is still evolving, like other fields of medicine, but these fields are still evolving, and still understanding, the complexities of the brain and how it works.
Yeah.
Um, so sometimes I think there should be, um, the ministry and medicine working together when folks are dealing with these mental, psychological, psychiatric, um, emotional problems, spiritual
Yeah.
problems.
I agree. And I want to point out something too, leading us back into the criminal system and when mentally ill people interact with the police. According to mentalhealth.gov, and I'm going to read this, the vast majority of people with mental health problems are no more likely to be violent than anyone else. Most people with mental illness are not violent, and only 3 to 5% of violent acts can be attributed to individuals living with a serious mental illness. In fact, people with severe mental illnesses are over 10 times more likely to be victims of violent crime than the general population. I think that's very, very, very important to note. That just because a person has a mental health problem, that does not make them more likely to be more violent. And that's where the training for police officers need to come in, or we need to have special units who would know that just because this person is having a mental health episode, obviously they don't have any weapons or things like that, that does not mean that they're more likely to be violent. So you can come in with a different approach instead of guns blazing.
Well, yeah, we're going to come to that, but let's stay there for a moment with this ideal that um, people with mental illness are no more dangerous than other people. Let's talk about that for a second, because with these mass shootings, for example, oftentimes the shooter is someone who is struggling with mental illness. And so society says if we can keep guns out of the hand of the mentally ill, which I agree with actually, as well as folks who are criminally dangerous. But because, when these mass shootings occur, it is oftentimes someone who's struggling with mental illness that causes the average American to think that folks who have mental illness are more dangerous, more violent than the average citizen. And like you said, the data does not support that. The data doesn't support that idea, but that's what the average person think. But again, I would say that we need to do a better job keeping weapons out of the hands of people who have mental illness, just as we need to do a better job keeping weapons out of the hands of dangerous criminals. But don't think that just because the average mass shooter is dealing with some sort of mental illness, that people with mental illness are dangerous generally.
Right. And I mean, there's so much crime and violence that goes on in the country that does not get reported. That's not one of these mass shootings that doesn't involve multiple people. That is on an individual basis, within families. And a lot of those people are not mentally ill. They may have a criminal pattern, criminal behavior, etc. But it just doesn't get reported in the news into larger society. And the mental health spectrum is so broad. It can be as, just a person who suffers from seasonal depression all the way up to bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and even more. So when we hear about these mass shootings, it oftentimes involves the more extreme spectrum of someone, who may have bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, etc., versus someone who has a general anxiety disorder or seasonal depression, and is managing it, and you would never know unless they told you. So it's just such a broad spectrum, and it's not just the schizophrenias or depressions. Is something that can affect our ability to have daily function in life. So if your emotions are messed up, you may not be able to be as productive at work as you could, or you may jump from job to job, or your family relationships may be tattered. So it may not be this just huge, this person is dealing with delusions, but because it could be an emotional issue, their family relationships are messed up. So it's just so broad. We can't just paint it all with one broad stroke, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, in fact, that brings up another topic before we get back specifically to what we want to talk about, and that is the mental health diagnosis, spectrum, is it too broad? Does it include things that or conditions that you know like you said, if you're sad, or if you are situationally depressed, under some definitions, and I may be exposing. In fact, I know I'm exposing my ignorance to this whole mental health space. In fact, we're going to bring on your mom. We're gonna have her to call in because I think she can really contribute right here, having
Yes.
worked in this space for 25 or so years. She is always educating me on this. Um, but go ahead and answer that question for me while I get her on the line.
I mean, that's a great question, Dad. um, we have something called the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders that kind of categorizes these mental disorders and these mental health um, diagnoses. And it is pretty broad. It goes from DSM 1 all the way to DSM 5, the last time I checked. For those who don't know, I did major in psychology in undergrad, so I did study this extensively. Obviously, I'm a lawyer now, and I've been studying the law. But I do remember, um, studying the DSM and these various illnesses in undergrad to get my bachelor's of science in psychology. But it's a good question, Dad. I think it's good to have it that broad because a person who is dealing with maybe seasonal depression and may not know or may not be diagnosed with it may think, okay, something's wrong with me. Something's wrong with me as a person. Versus if they go to a licensed professional and they realize that no, this is a mental health disorder, this is a medical condition, something that has to do with my brain, that might be able to give them more tools to deal with their depression or their feelings versus them just thinking this is just who I am as a person. So I think it being that broad is pretty good. I just think the public, and more specifically in this context, law enforcement need to be educated and trained more on how broad it is and on what it looks like when they interact with someone who may be diagnosed with a mental illness or undiagnosed or untreated as well.
All right, I think I have your mom on the line, and
Hey, Ma.
Hello. Hello. How is everyone?
Good.
we're
Welcome
good.
to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be a part. You all are doing a very good job discussing this.
Well, I was showing my ignorance in this space. Like Chloe said, she majored in psychology, and you worked in this field, not specifically psychology, but social science, for 25, 30 years. And so I felt the need for me to put my hand over my mouth and stop talking because people who are educated in this area were going to start saying, "Ooh, he is really ignorant about this." So I said, "Let me get my better half up here." So Chloe addressed the question. And by the way, you all, we're going to start doing this going forward. We're going to start having some folks call in, like you see on some of the serious channels. Going to
We're a
start taking
serious
some.
channel, Dad. Hold up. We are a serious channel.
Well, I
We
mean
may not have the
serious.
numbers yet, but
No, I mean serious. The net that you have in
oh,
your
the
car.
networks.
Sirius
Okay, my
XM.
bad.
Sirius XM. Yes, exactly.
Oh, okay.
No, we are a very serious channel. You're absolutely right about that. All right. Okay, so So, Chloe, you did a good job answering my question. I wanted your mom to get in because she and I have discussed this so many times. So, Tony, my question, I don't know if you heard it, but
No, I did not.
okay, my question was or is um, whether or not this whole mental health is diagnosis, are they too broad? Does it include things, for example, like, I mean, you're just having a bad day or you're dealing with, some situational depression or something. And then somehow that gets included in what is now mental illness. So we're going to give you a couple minutes to try to, educate us about that, and then we're going to get back to our topic. But like Chloe said, welcome to the Defiant Lawyers, and you got the floor.
Okay, thank you. I think, of course, sometimes people may think that the mental health field is too broad, but I think with the medical professionals in that field, the psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists and counselors, they have been trained and they know when to actually diagnose someone with a mental illness. They realize if it's just a situational event going on in someone's life, they're not going to put a label on that person. So they have the mental health community and the organizations that overlook and oversee the mental health field. They have certain criteria that people have to meet in order for them to get a formal and a clinical diagnosis, from my understanding. So if someone lost a loved one and they're feeling sad and down, feeling depressed, they're not going to say, okay, now you're suffering with major depressive disorder. Okay, they're going to realize, because they would gather information from you, understand what's going on in your life at that moment. They're going to say this is more likely situational depression. We'll just keep an eye on it. Come back to me, in 2 weeks or something of that nature, and we'll see how you are doing. Because a lot of times, my understanding is it has to be where you are showing signs of mental illness over a period of time, and not because of just, one situational, as Chloe said, a season in your life. So
Okay.
they definitely have criteria that they have to abide by and comply with before they slap a diagnosis on you.
Okay.
Does that
Well,
make any sense?
that does. And,
It does.
I'll push back just a little bit here. One of the things I write about in my book is how African American male students in public schools are typically overrepresented in special education because of the sort of overdiagnosis of mental illness with, in our community.
Well,
Yes.
uh,
Now, of course, now I agree that, of course, in any field, you can have some providers who um, are showing some prejudice or biases or discriminating and are not being as thoughtful as they should be, even as professionals. And we would tend to have an overrepresentation of young men or young people of color diagnosed with ADHD or ADD. So, I mean, I think that's in any field. You can have people who are very good professionals and others who are not as good. And they will just overdiagnose the same way you have medical doctors who overprescribe medication and opioids, you know?
yeah. And I want to add this too. A learning or intellectual disability is different from a mental illness. Um,
Right.
so yes, black boys unfortunately have been seen as having intellectual disabilities. You know, that just comes from the racism and things that you talked about in your book, which I encourage everyone to go read. We'll put it in the description, how public schools fail black boys. But that different, there it is. There it is. We'll link all of that information down below. but that is being diagnosed with an intellectual disability is different from being diagnosed with a mental illness. Mental illnesses typically can be treated with medication or other strategies versus intellectual disabilities unfortunately tend to be more lifelong and affect the person longer. I hope that makes sense. So they're not one and the same as well.
Okay.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that out.
So learning disabilities are not mental is not mental illness.
Mm-mm.
Right,
Okay. All
right.
right.
There is a distinction.
All right. Well, that's the very reason why we wanted to get you on the line here. Now we're gonna, sweetheart, we're going to um, move more into our topic. We'll let you go, but we may be calling you back later. Okay.
No problem. Okay.
Thank you, Mom.
Bye
Thank you.
bye.
Bye bye.
Mhm.
All right. So we getting a little sophisticated here, you all. We getting a little sophisticated here. Oh,
On the next broadcast, we're going to have a section where you all can call in and make a comment, ask a question, and we'll respond to it. So stay tuned. That information will be provided on the YouTube community page as well.
and when you all see me doing this stuff here, different things, please keep in mind I am producing the show while I serve as a guest host.
Yeah.
So,
Have a
uh,
section where you all can call in and make a comment.
I'm gonna give it up to you
ask a
that
question, and we'll respond to it. So stay tuned.
for
That information will be provided on the YouTube.
sorry that
Being
that
the
that
executive
shouldn't have happened.
producer
But
and hosting.
I
Y'all
want
give it up for Augustus Gets Justice in the chat. Let him know that you appreciate all of the hard work that he does because it takes a lot of work to produce this show, to put all of the clips together, to get all of the equipment set up. So I want to share right now publicly. I appreciate it.
thank you very much. Thank you very much. And so can you all hear me okay, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's look here, Chloe. We got some comments here from folks that we want to get to, but let's get back now to this one single question um, of this one single question of whether or not Black people should call the police when they have a family member who is dealing with mental illness and are having an episode. Okay. Um, let's see. All right, Sister Ave. Sister Ave. And I thought, in fact, I think Sister Ave is in this space as well, professionally. And she has made a comment. She said, "It is best to call a crisis line. The law does not understand it and treat them as criminals." All right. Okay. Sister Ave says psychotherapy is very important. This is how you work out your soul salvation. In a number of instances, discernment is key. Um, all right, very good. Those are good comments. All
Thank
right.
you.
Yes, thank you, Sister Eve. Now, let's move deeper into our topic. In a number of instances, discernment is key. Um, all right, very good. Those are good. Do y'all hear that?
Yeah.
All right. Yes, thank you, Sister Eve. Got rid of it. All right, here we go. Chloe, you pointed out twice already. Actually, let me make one correction. In your intro, you said that the risk of cops killing individuals with untreated serious mental illness is 6 times higher. When you got into your intro, you corrected it and said 16 times higher. So I want folks to know what it is. It is 16 times higher, not 6, but 16 times higher. And shout out Chloe here too, you all, because again, it is not easy sitting behind the mic and doing all this stuff. You can easily have those Freudian slips, and I do it all the time. But she and I want to be accurate on these things, so
Mhm.
we will correct each other. And so it is
Thank you.
actually 16 times higher than other civilians. So that tells us a lot right there. I mean, mental health, people with mental illness are the victims quite often of police shootings. And then this is from the Treatment Advocacy Center, Chloe, it says by the most conservative estimates, at least 1 in 4 fatal law enforcement encounters involves an individual with serious mental illness. 1 in 4. That's, what is that, 25%. When data have been vigorously collected and analyzed, findings indicate as many as half of all law enforcement homicides ends the life of an individual with severe psychiatric disease. That's why we're doing this today. I mean, half of all law enforcement homicides involves an individual with severe psychiatric disease. We just saw that with that young man, Miles Hall. And again, for some people, they say, he had a pipe, he ran at the police, end of story. Let's move on. They had the right to defend themselves, etc. We're not saying that police officers don't have the right to defend themselves. We're saying that police officers need to be better equipped to deal with folks with mental illness. That's what we're saying. When your mom, my wife, worked in CPS, I can remember when the police was called to the scene, Chloe, the police and the child was involved, they would call CPS. And CPS would be a part of that encounter. Well, why can't that be done? We'll talk about that later. Don't want to jump ahead of us. Why can't that be done when it comes to mental illness?
Yeah. It needs to be done because these numbers are horrific and tragic. And instead of getting the help that they need, their lives are ended. So it is up to the government because, as we know, the government employs law enforcement officers. It is up to the government to put solutions in place to analyze the causes and the consequences of what happens when trigger happy police officers come into contact with a person with mental illness. So we're calling on the government on all levels, the local level, the national level, to really hit this home so that these numbers can be changed.
And, when you use the term trigger happy, we we know, I'm sorry, someone's contacted me, but when you use the term trigger happy, we know that is the case oftentimes when the victim is African American. Okay, we know that from the data. Black men are much more likely to be killed by police officers than any other group in America. Although more white people are killed by officers, black men are killed disproportionately. In addition, though, to being trigger happy, some of them, again, are just ill equipped. They just don't know how to deal with mentally ill people, Chloe. And as a result of that, they revert to their training, which is what? Shoot, 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 and don't stop shooting.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what needs to change, the education aspect of law enforcement. You have a lot of police departments that train their officers to be like mini SWAT teams or like the militarization of police
Education
forces. No,
aspect. We need
of law enforcement. Police
you have
officers to be trained on how to deal with mentally ill people or someone who's having a mental health crisis, so that 50% of these deadly encounters do not involve people with mental illness.
All right, now let's throw into that's a segue into let's throw into race. So we've talked about cops, we've talked about mental illness, cops and mental illness. Now let's add another aspect to this, and that's the issue of race. And we see from this, let me put it on the full screen. Talked about mental illness, cops and mental illness. Now let's add, sorry about that. I don't know why that keeps happening, you all. But we got it on the full screen now to show that blacks, the rate at which black Americans are killed by police is more than twice as high as the rate for white Americans. And we see that the rate for Hispanic Americans is high as well, but it's not as high as blacks. And whites are half of both blacks and whites, more than half, less than half for blacks in comparison to blacks. And then others, Asians, etc., Middle Easterns, it's even lower than that. So there is a lot of interaction and violence when blacks and law enforcement come together. And that violence is typically one way, and that is police officers killing blacks.
Yeah. And you'll see here that the numbers killed for whites is 3,174 versus a black person 1,672. But look at the total U.S. population. The total U.S. white population is 197 million, and the total U.S. black population is 42 million, which is significantly less than the almost 200 million of white Americans. And what we're talking about is the proportion, the rate. So even though the actual number of black people killed is less, in proportion to our population in US society, the rate is substantially higher. That's what we're referring to.
Now, here's a map. The Washington Post has been keeping a record of police shootings since 2015. And here is a map of those shootings across the country. And so everywhere you see an orange dot circle, that has been that was where a police shooting occurred. And if you look closely at the map, you'll see some parts of the map are darker than other parts of the map. So that is also data. So this is some good data here to see that police shootings are very serious, very, very, very serious. Now,
Yeah.
now let's talk about the past couple of years, Chloe, since the pandemic. Black people have accounted for a disproportionate 20% of the nearly 300 Americans with known mental illness who were fatally wounded, that means killed, during police shootings. Let me say it again. Black people accounted for a disproportionate 20%. And to explain what we mean by disproportionate, it means this. Black people make up about 12% of the American population. So you would expect that 12% of the people who are killed by police officers would be black. But instead of it being 12%, it's almost twice that. It's 20%. So that's what we mean by disproportionate. That tells you that police officers handle encounters with black people with mental illness different than they do all others. I would
Yeah.
say black and Hispanics. We just saw that the The incident with Hispanics is pretty high as well, much higher than whites. But blacks, is the highest. So I keep
Yeah.
going back to this question of whether or not a black, whether or not black people should call the police when they have a family member who's dealing with some mental illness and is having an episode. I remember a case here, Chloe, some couple years back, where a mother, they showed the body cam on TV. A mother called the police on her son who was having a mental health episode. And she told them that he was schizophrenic. She told the dispatcher that. And so when the police got there, she left the house and left her son in the house. Okay. And when the police got there, the guy came out of the house with a screwdriver in his hand. And she left out just in front of him and said he's schizophrenic. And he had the screwdriver. And they said, drop it, put it down, drop it. And if I remember, I don't think he was charging at them or anything. He just had it in his hand and didn't drop it. And they shot him to death.
Mm.
Now, to me, that is a clear-cut case of police officers simply not knowing how to handle someone with mental illness. They shouldn't even have been called to go and handle that matter, to be honest. Dallas or whatever department that was should have had a special unit to handle a situation like that. I like what Sister Ave said. We're going to come to that in just a moment.
Yeah. I have a thought in conjunction to what Sister Ave said about what that mother could have done instead of calling the police. Perhaps instead of having 911, we need to have another number that will signify calling mental health crisis centers, so that they can come out potentially and try to deal with the situation. And then if it turns to something else, and perhaps
Well,
the police
yeah, we're
can
going to
get
talk
involved
about
as
that. That's in our solution section.
right.
So let's keep sort of developing it. We're gonna spend some time talking about that. Absolutely.
So as you all can see here, when you mix race with a person with mental illness, then it just becomes even a lot worse. That the deadly encounter between that person with mental illness who's black or brown has a much higher likelihood of being killed, unfortunately, by the police.
All right. All right. Here is another some more information. The evidence suggests that black people exhibiting signs of mental distress are likely at greater risk of dying during law enforcement encounters. I remember a case that you and I had, a criminal case. A young man was accused of uh, he was having a mental health episode, and he was accused of leaving his car and I think getting behind the wheel of a police car, if I remember it correctly.
Yeah.
You remember that case?
Mm-hmm.
And to Dallas County's credit, but we're going to take that credit back here in just a minute because we're going to show you some things. But Dallas County does have a mental health prosecution unit. And we were able to get his case transferred to that unit. And they are trained to deal with folks who have mental illness. So we were able to get him some help and get a really good outcome for his case because, Chloe, we know with criminal statutes, two things are required. One is you got to show that a person did something, a criminal act, but you also have to show that they intended. There's some intent there, mens rea. And someone who's dealing with mental illness doesn't have that criminal intent. I mean, they're dealing with, as you explained earlier, some sort of mental illness. It may even be a psychosis. It may be a brain issue. And so, ordinarily, if they were not suffering from that, they would not have committed that act. So, they should get, to me, special treatment under the law.
Yeah, I agree. It reminds me of another case we had. A person was in a mental health episode and was accused of taking some vegetables or something from a out of a grocery store because they were homeless as well. You remember this case?
Yes, I do.
And again, to Dallas County's credit, we were able to get a good result. And like you said at the top of the hour, we make it a priority if one of our criminal clients has mental illness. We make sure we go all out like we do with all of our clients. But we know because of this information and the statistics, how important it is to make prosecutors aware, to make law enforcement aware about these issues, about the mental health. And we've been able to do, pretty good in advocating for our clients that have mental illness in the criminal context. So it reminds me of that case as well.
Yes, I
Yeah.
remember that case.
Mm-hmm.
And you bring out a good point because oftentimes folks who deal with mental illness are not only dealing with mental illness, they're typically also dealing with homelessness
Yeah.
and substance abuse oftentimes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a
So,
configuration of all of that. And so as criminal defense attorneys, it's our job to educate not only the prosecutors, but the judge, law enforcement, etc. And that's what we make sure that we do with all of our clients that have mental illness.
yes. Now, on Facebook, Sister April made the comment that Dallas does now have a partnership with social workers. So we applaud that. But, Sister April, we're going to take all that credit back from Dallas. We're going to show a video now that is just shameful, quite
Yeah.
frankly. So let's talk about it on the other side of this video. And we were having some problems with the audio. I hope we can get the audio better. I'll try.
It still sounds very low to me.
Really?
Yeah.
Doesn't sound like you can hear it that well, huh?
Mm-mm.
Wow.
We could see everything though.
But you couldn't hear what was being said. All right, so let's sorry about that. Let's okay. Sister April, here's what we were talking about. Um Dallas Dallas Morning News reported just a couple of weeks ago that some defendants with mental illness are waiting. I want to put this on the full screen. are waiting in the Dallas County Jail for more than 2 years
Mm,
before being transferred to state hospitals. Let's stop right there. There's
mm.
more to this story. But just imagine you have been found, say, mentally incompetent, which means the case can't move forward because you can't really understand what's going on. You're not able to communicate with your lawyers. It would be unfair to prosecute you while you're in that mental condition. So the state says that this person has to be restored to competence before you can move forward. So this person needs treatment, basically, is what that means. And to get that person treatment, that person needs to be sent to a facility that has available beds. Now imagine the person having to wait 2 years before a bed is available.
Mm.
And the crime that they are facing sometimes are misdemeanors that doesn't require but at a maximum of 1 year. Yet, you're being told you may have to wait 2 years. Well, what we typically do in those cases is if they can't, we either file a speedy trial motion, try to get the case dismissed, or if the prosecutor's not ready in a certain amount of time to take a case to trial, then we ask the judge just to dismiss the case. And so we as defense attorneys are happy when we're able to get that done. But then at the same time, Chloe, that person leaves jail without getting any help. Just
Yeah.
put them back on the streets without
Yeah.
getting any kind of help.
And being in jail typically exacerbates the symptoms of mental illness as well. So not only did they, were they waiting in jail, not getting treatment, but the condition could get worse, could get a lot worse because, we've seen firsthand and we've done research on how um, mentally ill people in jail, it really, really can affect their mental state even more negatively and cause it to worsen. And so then the person goes out on the street um, and may get involved in more crime, and then it's just a cycle that continues to repeat. So Dallas County, you all need to do better.
Period.
Period. Y'all need to do better
I'm going.
from the
I'm.
judges on down.
I'm going to try to get that story. I'm going to try to get that video teed up. Okay. I think I can. All right. Let's go to the next. Let's go back to that slide because it has some more info up there. Dallas County officials say, Chloe, can you handle this slide while I try to get this fixed?
Yes, yes. So again, this is from the Dallas Morning News, the premier newspaper in Dallas. But the article goes on to say that Dallas County officials say 400 inmates who have been deemed to be incompetent to stand trial have waited an average of either 180 days, 6 months on nonviolent charges. On nonviolent charges. So this is not the assault charges, the robbery charges, the murder charges. These are nonviolent offenses. Perhaps a trespass. A
So this is
trespass
not
case.
the assault charges, the
Um,
robbery charges,
a
the murder
theft
charges,
case, or maybe a couple $100s. So these are nonviolent charges. They're having to wait 160 days or 330 days on violent charges. Dallas County's average wait time for a state psychiatric hospital bed is longer than any other urban county in Texas, with some waiting more than 800 days for hospital admittance, according to the state data. That is just a shame. That I mean, that is crazy. Waiting more than 800 days. Now y'all, I'm a lawyer, I'm not a mathematician, but we know there's 365 days in a month. Let's calculate that. That's a little over 2 years that these people are having to wait in jail without getting treatment, without going to a hospital, being in those type of conditions. And it's just sad. Now, the article goes on to say that Dallas County DA John Cruzo said that the wait times can surpass the maximum sentence of some misdemeanor charges, compelling the county to dismiss cases entirely. So obviously, as defense attorneys, we like that. We like getting dismissals for our clients. But the fact that they're even having to wait in jail that long for that many months, and years on end is a shame. It's a shame. And Dallas County, you all need to get this together. Officials need to come together to solve this problem. This does not need to happen. Come on, let's get it. You think you got the video, Dad?
Yeah, I think I may have it. Wow.
Okay.
I,
Well, while you doing that,
I messed
we
up
have
a little bit, but go ahead. Go ahead.
we have some more information about just the horrendous state of the mental health facilities in Texas. So Governor Abbott, good old Greg Abbott, cut $210 million from Texas Health and Human Services, which oversees mental health services in Texas. And his office is trying to argue that these cuts, these millions of dollars in cuts, won't impact mental health programs. However, as you see on the screen, according to Mental Health America, Texas ranks last in the nation for access to mental health services. Now, look, there's a saying in Texas that everything is bigger in Texas, and unfortunately, everything is bigger. The state of mental health, the amount of mental health people not having access to mental health services, that is bigger because we're last in the nation. So I'll call on Greg Abbott to do something. This is why we put you all in office. This is why you all are elected officials. And you like to say how big Texas is, the amount of economy and businesses that are in Texas. Let's stop putting so much focus on businesses and protecting corporations, but actually protect your citizens and those suffering from mental health services. So I hope that someone in his administration or Beto O'Rourke, who's trying to challenge Greg Abbott, will put the focus on mental health and get this situated, because these numbers are a shame. And Texas should be ashamed of this information being out there.
All right, let's try the video again.
Let's go.
An officer first sees Hall down the street as he approaches two people while armed with a large metal pole in his hand. The officer calls to Hall in an attempt to divert his attention from the residents. Hall immediately appears to turn his attention to the officers and runs toward them. The video shows one officer firing a total of 6 beanbag rounds at Hall in an attempt to stop his approach. These are the first 4 shots you will see and hear. When these shots fail to stop Hall, 2 other officers fire their handguns.
Yes, I'm calling to report my grandson is trying to break into the house. I need someone here right away.
We have a caller from inside of that residence. She's stating she's the grandmother and the grandson is having a mental breakdown.
We need to have police at our house.
What's
Please.
happening
35. He's being violent. He broke our sliding glass window, and he's threatening us with it. He has like this long pole, and he's with a metal pole, and he's threatening us with it. But we left the house, and he has mental health issues.
Be back! Stop! 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 Shots fired. Miles!
Put it down!
All right. I think the audio and everything was good that time, right?
Yeah. You want to know the first thing I noticed in that call from the grandmother and mom? They said multiple times that he's having a mental breakdown and that he has a mental health disorder. That was said on at least 2 occasions that I called, maybe once more. So 911 emergency services were aware that Miles was in the middle of a mental health breakdown. And like you said at the top of the hour, Dad, yes, I understand that police officers need to protect themselves. They have the right to protect themselves. We're not saying that officers should put themselves in harm's way, but they need more training and information on how to deal with someone who is not necessarily violent typically, but maybe in the middle of a mental breakdown, and how to deal with them. Getting a taser out, trying to calm them down, de-escalate the situation instead of firing multiple rounds and then firing again. That's what we're talking about, that type of training that they need.
Okay. Now, the next video that I was trying to show you, here it is.
Inside the Dallas County Jail, there are more than 360 prisoners who've been found incompetent to stand trial, all waiting for a bed in a state mental hospital.
The wait is just incredibly long.
A judge ruled one of defense attorney Starr Raymer's clients incompetent in February 2021. The judge ordered that he be sent to a state mental hospital. He is still waiting in jail more than 460 days later.
There's no end in sight. And that's another one of the problems, is you have literally no idea when their number is going to finally be called.
795 days. That's the average wait time for a male prisoner in the Dallas County Jail to get into a maximum security state hospital bed. It's 231 days for a female prisoner.
So that's unacceptable. I don't care how you cut it.
Dallas County Commissioner Teresa Daniel.
It costs right now about $67 a day if you're in our jails. If you are receiving any kind of health care or mental health services, it jumps to about $120 a day. So do the math. It's very expensive.
WFA first detailed the issue in 2016, highlighting the case of Thomas Johnson, who stabbed a White Rock Lake jogger to death. A judge had found the diagnosed schizophrenic incompetent to stand trial.
When there's not enough beds to treat the people that are in jail, that's a crisis that I think that we all need to be concerned about.
Johnson eventually got a bed in a state mental hospital. He was found competent to stand trial and received a life sentence in 2019. Statewide, the wait times have long been bad, but state officials say those wait times have been exacerbated by the pandemic. In 2020, the wait time for a maximum security bed in Texas was 270 days. It's now 514 days. The wait time for a minimum security bed was 111 days. It's now 230 days. And there are 2,300 people waiting for a state hospital bed in county jails across Texas.
This is not a good situation for all the counties, and it's really putting everybody into crisis.
Mike Lazito works for Bexar County.
They need to go off to a state hospital to stand trial. They're kind of in a limbo, right?
That's absolutely right. The person is waiting, so they can't be released. Sometimes they're waiting longer than what their sentence would be. They're not getting their fair day in court.
Lazito says there are more than 220 prisoners waiting in the Bexar County Jail, almost double the number from a year ago. And he adds, it's on the state to fix the problem.
That's the responsibility of the state to restore individuals back to competency so they can stand trial.
In Dallas, I'm Tanya Iser.
There it is. That's why I wanted to play this, because it leaves you speechless. And all the things you just said about Greg Abbott cutting the budget, okay, to Texas Health and Human Services, which oversees mental health, in light of this, is just horrendous.
Yep.
So not only is that person sitting in jail unjustly, but that person is sitting in jail unjustly with mental illness. Why is that a problem? Because we've seen it firsthand. people with these mental illnesses sitting in jail like that, they not only begin to deteriorate, but they're oftentimes vulnerable to the other inmates. The other inmates, tend to pick on them, take advantage of them, abuse them, even some of the guards. And someone may say, okay, well, it is what it is. Yeah, but suppose that was your loved one. Suppose that was your son, daughter, father, mother, sister. It's totally different when it's our family member.
Yep.
All right, solutions. What can we do? Because as we said, Chloe, these people end up back on the streets, and they're therefore going to oftentimes end up with more law enforcement encounters, which increases their chance of being what? Killed. All because they couldn't get help. Solutions. Here are several. And it's what we've said already. First of all, increase, not decrease, spending on mental illness treatment, Greg Abbott. Increase, dramatically increase spending on mental illness, as you so eloquently said, Chloe. Let's prioritize, stop prioritizing businesses so much and start prioritizing citizens.
Yep.
Vulnerable populations of citizens.
Yep. And, okay, people may ask, okay, well, where's the money going to come from? Well, let's cut down on funding these police departments.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Let's talk about that. Defunding the police. Go ahead. Let's talk about
Let's defund these police departments. Let's disperse some of those funds that the police receive and put it into increasing spending for mental illness treatment. I was shocked to learn after the tragic Uvalde shooting of those precious children and teachers that 40% of the city of Uvalde's budget went to funding Uvalde police officers.
Wow.
And we've seen in the news.
I didn't know that. Really?
Yeah. More than 40%. I want to say it's nearly half. And then we saw on the news the criticism that the Uvalde police are receiving about the response to that shooting. So you have a city where half of your budget is going to the police. That budget needs to be decreased, and those funds need to be dispersed to increasing mental health crisis centers, to increasing funding to a center with the within the actual police department, increasing funding within jails to get appropriate mental health crisis providers inside jails. Those funds need to be taken away from the police. The police need to be defunded, and they need to be given to mental crisis providers.
Wow.
That may be controversial. People may not like it. They may, perk up about it, but it is what it is.
It is what it is. And they can like it or not. We still got to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because you make an excellent point.
And it also protects the police officers, because then we have people who are trained to deal with a person in a mental health episode who may be able to de-escalate the situation versus, the police officer escalating the situation, making the person become with their delusions could become violent because of the response of the police, putting other officers at risk and citizens. So if we take that money out of the budget for police officers, put it towards mental crisis providers, it could save lives on both ends, for both the mentally ill person as well as the police officer as well.
That is right. And we already acknowledge, police officers are oftentimes just not equipped to handle those mental health situations.
Yeah.
And obviously your definition of defunding the police does not mean just cutting the budget of the police department and, you know, doing something with the money that doesn't help anybody. You're saying basically redirecting the funds to needs in the community that would ultimately even help police departments.
Yep. Yep.
But see, this kind of conversation doesn't happen. You know why not? Because oftentimes people will hijack these kinds of conversations, will co-opt these kinds of conversations, attach a toxic meaning to a term like to fund the police, and then it gets, you know, just then it just causes arguments like critical race theory. Instead of it being seriously discussed,
Yeah.
instead of it being taken seriously, it becomes a caricature.
Yeah.
It becomes a character, some sort of misinformed clown or something. And that's what happens with defund the police. And because again, it could be a good thing. It could be a good thing if there are not hospital beds, mental health beds to help the mentally ill, and they're ending back up on the streets, and police officers are having to deal with them. Why not trim some money off police budgets to create some more beds for these people so they can get treatment, which will reduce law enforcement encounter with such people, with such conditions? Makes sense to me.
And also, the 911 workers, their official name is eluding me, but I think they need to be trained in mental illness as well, so that they can properly divert the call to the proper mental health crisis center, and not just always to the police department. And I've heard police officers say, "Well, we want some of the funds to be diverted to mental illness treatment and crisis centers, because we're having to do everything, go out, try to catch criminals, go out to these mental health service calls where it's unpredictable. We don't have the training." So I've actually heard police officers say, like, hey, we support this. We support giving more fund to mental health providers so that they can go out and respond to these calls and kind of take the burden off of us.
Yes. So, Chloe, I'm going to bring us back to the question. We've been talking about the deadly mixture of cops, race, and mental illness. And from that mixture, the question arises, should Black people call police when their family member is having a mental health breakdown or episode? That is the question. Okay? That's the question. And, back to some of these one or two of these solutions here. Crisis intervention teams. So not only increased spending, but crisis intervention teams, which are, from my understanding, are police officers who are, chosen to be a part of a crisis intervention team who receive specialized training. And so when a mental health call comes in, which is another issue, because oftentimes the dispatchers, like you said, the paramedics and all the other folks, they need specialized training as well, because the dispatcher needs to be able to ask the correct questions and get the correct information, right? And sometimes the dispatchers doesn't even, they get the like you said in that call we heard with Miles Hall, the mother said, "Oh, and he has mental health issues." Oh, he has mental health issues. Question is, did that get to the police officers? I think in that case it did, because if I remember, what happened is the police officers actually called their unit, their mental health unit, to have somebody to come out, but they ended up killing him first. I believe it was that situation.
Mm.
I believe, I'm not certain about that. So I don't have the answer to whether or not somebody should call the police. We're not going to offer an answer on that. We don't want someone saying, well, I'm not going to call the police based on what the Corbetts said, and something goes awry. We're not saying not to call the police if your loved one is having a mental health episode. We're not saying that. We're just raising the question. I'm just putting myself in the shoes of some of these people, and I would be really, 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 really concerned about calling the police if I had a family member dealing with a mental health. I would be very, very, very concerned. I'm just being honest.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fact that they're black too.
Well, yeah,
That just
absolutely.
that doubles
That
the concern. I
that's
was
why
watching an
that's the main reason why I'd be concerned.
yeah, yeah. I was watching a news story of a couple out in Washington, I believe, or Oregon, one of those. And their son has schizophrenia, and they had to call the police. He was in a mental episode, and the white woman said that when the police got there, she put herself between the police officer and her son because the police officer was becoming kind of aggressive, and she put herself between her son and said, he has mental health. You can't handle him like that. Stop being aggressive, basically. And she acknowledged, what struck me is later in the interview, she acknowledged, she said, I know I'm privileged to be able to do that, because I don't know, I don't believe, black and brown mothers would be able to put themselves, in front of their loved one to protect themselves from an aggressive police officer. So I recognize my privilege in being able to step in and explain to the police officer that my son has mental health issues. And that struck me that she acknowledged that, as a white woman, as a white mother. And that's just the reality of the situation based on the numbers that we showed.
Yes. I focused on Facebook and I neglected our YouTube folks. And I see that we had some comments on YouTube. So I want to go back quickly. I see, of course, your mom, and I also see Alicia. I think you shouted her out. And Alicia said something that was very courageous, and I want to go back to that. She said, yes, never be ashamed of it. I have been diagnosed with severe depression, and I have to manage it constantly with the right tools. How courageous, Alicia, it is of you to share that information. And um, and I can say, knowing you, that despite that diagnosis, and I wasn't aware of that diagnosis, by the way, but despite that diagnosis, you have made a lot of accomplishments in life. And so thank you for sharing that. And it drives home the point that it's really nothing to be ashamed of. Just like someone wouldn't be ashamed of having a medical condition. All right. So again, shout out to Alicia. I wish I had my thing here working, but it's not. So I could give her a shout, a clap, but it's not working. I don't know why. Had some trouble producing today, Chloe.
We kept the show moving.
We
I
kept it
I had
moving.
some trouble at the top of the hour, the intro. The producing was a little messed up, but the information is always going to be good.
That's right.
Y'all can know that.
That's
We
right.
may make some mistakes in what the way that we say things, or there may be a little producing issue, but you're going to get the correct information.
That's right.
Rest assured of that.
Exactly. All right, so that's going to conclude our broadcast today. It was a little bit longer than normal, but look, this is very, very, very important. Um, I don't have the answer for you all about whether to call the police as an African American and your loved one is having mental health. I like what Abe said. Sister Abe said, call a crisis hotline. In fact, let me just put this one thing. Let me see, is it still? Yeah. This last solution. So, crisis intervention teams are within police departments, those that have them. And typically, those are the bigger departments. The smaller ones are just, some of them haven't even, there are about 19,000 different police departments in the country. And a lot of the smaller ones don't even do this. The third thing here, I really like this thing. It's called the Crisis Assistance Helping Out on the Streets, or the COHOOTS initiative. And this is what Sister Abe is talking about. This program is someone that you call, and they actually send a team of mental health experts to the person, oftentimes without law enforcement. Now, that is a serious program. I really like that. Some jurisdictions have implemented that program. What do you think about that program, Chloe, as a solution?
That's absolutely wonderful. And I think that that program started out of Eugene, Oregon. I think that's wonderful. And I think that they should be rewarded with financial assistance for doing that. I believe that the federal government should start some type of funding to where if a city has started this type of program like Cahoots, they get federal funding. So instead of, all the military spending that we're doing, spending billions and trillions of dollars on military defense, let's divert some of those funds and reward municipalities and police departments that have recognized this crisis of mental health and deadly police shootings. Let's reward them financially by creating cahoots and other initiatives that work in conjunction with the police. So I hope that someone listens to this,
Well,
someone
let me
who,
just piggyback on what you just said. I'll go further and say that it's more the responsibility and duty of the city officials, like the city manager, the mayor, the county commissioners. Here we have what are called judges. Those folks who control police departments and sheriff's departments. I believe it's their responsibility to see to it that their law enforcement units have this treatment. I mean, these specialized skills, or at least a unit within their departments. I hold them accountable. And as a lawyer, and we represent some of these some families who have had these tragic situations to occur, that's who we look to. We look to not only the police department who pulled the police officer who pulled the trigger, but the municipality, the official that he reports to or she reports to. They should be the one who, as you said, put some money where their mouth is and get these officers some help so that they know how to deal with these mental health situations. A person should not have to die because they're having a mental health episode when there are people who are trained to help de-escalate these matters. A police officer, and my understanding is they don't get this kind of training at the police academy. What they learn to do is shoot and don't stop shooting.
Yeah.
And that's the last thing these people need. Okay? And before we go, look at the comments one more time. Sister Ave said here, she said, as a person of color, I would think long and hard about calling the police if my family is having a mental health crisis. Call the crisis line, please. That's her final comment. And yeah, I mean, I understand that is a fear that is in the African American community, not only when the police pulls us over, but in these mental health situations, because we showed you a video of a grandmother and mother calling the police, not thinking that their grandson and son would be killed by the police. All right?
Yeah.
Okay. That's it. I'm pretty motivated about this topic.
Me too.
My heart goes out to folks who are suffering mental illness and their families.
Me too. We hope you all have gotten something out of this. We hope that you all have become motivated in each of your towns and cities to hold like my dad said, the city officials, the elected officials accountable so that we can decrease this number of people who die by police when they're having a mental episode. This is not just something that affects the mental health community, but it affects families every single day, especially in the Black community. So we hope that you all have taken all of this information. It has inspired and motivated you as well to go into each of your communities to be legal rebels and to defy the system and to bring awareness about it as well. Like we said, we are going to be introducing a new feature of our broadcast where you'll be able to call in and not only write a comment like you've been doing so far, but you can make a comment to us or ask a question. Obviously, it needs to be respectful and appropriate. Okay, let's keep that clear, respectful and appropriate. But we want to hear from all of you all. We want to make sure that we're building a community of like-minded people who have a thirst for justice and bringing this type of information to light, especially as it relates and affects the Black community. So we are just so excited to continue to build this community as we continue on this journey. We will see you all next week, same time, 2 to 3 Central Standard Time. And we hope that you all have a blessed one. With that,
peace.
Peace.